I am Adriana, and I'm going to share with you how to have meaningful recreation and leisure in your life, and tips and tricks on how to cultivate your moments.
Good morning, Lynn. It's so lovely to have you. It feels like I'm in a dream world right now. It truly does. So, good morning and welcome. How are you doing today?
Good morning. I'm doing really well. Thank you. I'm
Yeah,
very excited to be here on your program.
awesome. Thank you so much. So, to really get us started and get our feet wet, I'd love to learn a little bit about you. So, I'm wondering if you could really tell us a bit about yourself.
Sure. Well, I've been practicing in the field of therapeutic recreation since 1982, so quite a while. And I feel um, that I've been extremely fortunate to find a career that just I love. And, even after all these years, I still am completely in love with our field and the things that we do. I actually started out as a fisheries and wildlife biologist, changed to outdoor recreation, and at that point discovered therapeutic recreation. And so I went back to graduate school and did some master's level courses, worked for several years in the field. I feel very fortunate. I worked at a regional healthcare facility that served pediatrics, mental health, substance use, um, physical rehabilitation. So I've really got a breadth of experiences in the field. Started teaching on my lunch hour, like I think many people in our field do, at a
Hmm.
university, and then began teaching full time and got my PhD in therapeutic recreation. So I took a non traditional path in the field, but I feel like that's true for a lot of people. I think many of us didn't grow up knowing what recreation therapy was. And so, which is a shame because I could have taken a shorter path to the field. um, and I'm married. I've been married for 40 some years and have two beautiful children and three grandchildren, of which I'm going
Oh,
to meet our granddaughter for the first time. They live in Maine and we haven't been able to go in person, so we're really excited to finally get to meet her next week.
oh, that's so exciting.
It
Well,
is.
thank you so much for sharing that. I feel like you have spearheaded so many amazing things in the field
Well, thank
and
you.
brought so many light. And I agree with, starting in a non-traditional path. Funny enough, I also started in conservation biology and then
No,
switched. Um, so I think, that is is saying something about the field of, we're still continuing to advocate for who we are and what we're doing. And I can imagine when you started, you were really, really new in the field. And um, yeah, it was only a few years that the field really existed. So that's awesome.
yeah.
Um,
And I think this may be true for you, but when I actually got hired with an outdoor rec degree to
mhm.
do therapeutic recreation, which wouldn't, I don't think, happen now
Very
today.
interesting.
And I had such strong mentors when I started that I feel like that's our duty now is to make sure we help other people that are finding that path, because I don't know if I would have really learned as much as I have about the field without those key people in my first recreation therapy job. They really helped me along. So that I would have to say is a passion of mine is mentoring new
Hmm.
professionals.
Yeah, I completely agree. I know my preceptor right now. She is amazing and really role modeled a lot of things that I had questioning about in the field. And with outdoor recreation, definitely, I think um, a lot of my programs have had some kind of um, conservation theme or nature theme. And I
Yeah,
feel like nature and growth often kind of go hand in hand. So we can make lots of metaphors for it in that way.
absolutely. I totally agree with you. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's awesome. Um, so I want to ask an additional question of what is your current passion? I know it sounds like you're a multi-passionate person, like many of us are in the field of recreation, but what's your passion right now that you're working towards?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think it's wonderful you're asking that question because it segues into the strengths approach so well, because I feel like passions are one of the foundational um, sort of driving forces of the strengths approach. If you can find people's passions, you can really help them flourish. So for myself, I think I've had a lifelong passion for nature-based activities. So anything outside, and it lights me up inside. So I love outdoor recreation of all sorts. We have a new rescue dog, and so lately we've been doing a lot of hiking because he's
Mm-hmm.
very high energy. But both my husband and I, we love cycling, and we hiking, and snowboarding, and cross country skiing, and kayaking, and just anything outside and anything active. Um,
Awesome.
Really, I love it. It just absorbs me. So
Mm-hmm.
as well, we both love to travel, and so that's been tough this last year, not being able to pursue that passion, but things are
Mm-hmm.
looking brighter now. So
Yeah, that's awesome. So my next question really leads into lots of the discussion that we're having, and what does meaningful recreation and leisure look like to you? So you really mentioned that outdoor recreation component of it, but I'm wondering if you have any tidbits or insight additionally to that.
yeah, so meaningful recreation is, you know, as we discussed earlier before the program started, it really is different to everybody. And I think there are some common elements. And I think
Mm-hmm.
if you can become totally absorbed, if you feel like you're expressing and leveraging your strengths, if you feel joy and enjoyment,
Mm-hmm.
if you feel a sense of satisfaction, and I also think if you feel some freedom to be yourself, freedom to choose, freedom from some of the things that hold us back from, meaningfulness in our lives. All those variables combined, I think, lead to meaningful recreation. And that very much describes my own experience. But I think the research also supports that those are elements that lead to satisfying, meaningful recreation that
Mm-hmm.
can help us really grow and really learn about ourselves. So yeah, so I'd have to say my experience isn't much different from what the research supports, that, meaningful recreation fully engages us and brings us enjoyment and pleasure,
Mm-hmm.
both.
That's awesome. Yeah, I can really hear flow coming out in that.
Exactly.
And yeah, lots of different things. I love how you tailored in the strength based approach, sorry, to that. And yeah, I see that, when I'm feeling my most meaning in recreation and leisure, it's when I'm able to use those strengths and really leverage that. So great segue into a strengths approach. So today we're going to be really going over two different components, and it'll be broken down into a two-part series. So the first one, your first baby and your first passion of the strengths approach, and the second one being inclusive recreation. So I'm really excited to get into it, and I really want to set a good foundation on the learning and understanding of this. So I'm wondering if you can explain a bit about what a strength-based approach is, or otherwise known as strength-based approach.
Right. Um, so I think that um, historically, when we have in the helping professions, when we've worked with people with differences, whether it's ability or, you know, health or whatever, their differences are, we've tended to always look through a lens of dysfunction and
Mm-hmm.
disability and problem orientation. And in fact, the research is pretty clear that we have this tendency as human beings to have this negativity bias. And so the strengths approach is really sort of an antidote to that, where if we can help people by looking through a lens of capabilities, of strengths, we can give meaning and hope to people that might otherwise not have experienced that. And so in the strengths approach, when we help somebody, we look at, instead of what's your problem, we would look at, what are your goals? What are your dreams and aspirations? What do you want from your life, not what you don't want from your life? So it sort of flips the lens. And once you do that, it's a whole different way of thinking about a person and helping a person. Um, so the strengths approach is very much embedded in a social model of disability, where a person is viewed as very much a part of their environment, and that we can change environments to help people function more fully or to flourish. It's not about fixing them. Oftentimes it's about fixing things around them so that they're able to, live their lives um, to the best of their ability, to their full ability. Um, so the strengths approach, then you approach somebody in the helping process by starting off with, what are your goals, dreams, and aspirations? What are your strengths? What can we use to help you meet those goals? And there are several principles that drive that process. And first of all is knowing that every person has strengths. And sometimes people have been very socialized into the medical model themselves, and so they don't even see their own strengths anymore. So when you do the assessment part of the TR process, sometimes I call it a treasure hunt, because you're helping people identify or re-identify those things about themselves that are strong, and then helping them develop, nurture, and express those more. Um, so every person has strengths, every environment has strengths, and sometimes it is a treasure hunt, and we need to help people find them again. And the other really important principle, I think, is that hopefulness matters, that people sometimes are really feeling very down because of their situation, and they've been given messages of failure. And so we need to help people see that there is hope, that we believe that they can achieve their goals and dreams and aspirations, and not just, everybody on the team has to, really help that person, see hopefulness in their situation. And that's another principle, is the team itself. Collaboration is really important. And within that is the idea that the person you're helping in the strengths approach is the expert, is the one leading the team. And the rest of us professionals, are there to support that person and to give our expertise where it helps support that person. We're not dominating the relationship, we're not guiding it or controlling it. We're supporting and nurturing that helping relationship for that person. Um, so the other, I guess, important principle, I think, is we should never assume we know how much a person can accomplish. We never know somebody's upper limits, and we'll be continually surprised if we approach people with an open mind about what they're able to achieve in their lives. And it's often much more than we would envision, based on our initial encounter with the person. So those are some important, approaches. Even our language needs to change in the strengths approach. So um, when I'm talking about the people we work with in the helping relationship, I never use patient or client, which kind of has a hierarchical meaning behind it, but participant, somebody who's actively engaged in the helping process and is the leader of that process. So, just the way we talk about people, the way we interact with people is all a part of the strengths approach. And it all matters, it all makes a difference.
That's awesome. I love how many different aspects you had going there. And I'm just trying to debrief this in my head as well. I think something really interesting that you started with and talked about is that treasure hunt. And I completely agree and witnessed this firsthand at a program a few weeks ago where we were doing I am statements and really getting them to see their strengths.
Very nice.
And I recognized even for myself when I was at a low point, it was so hard to see my strengths. So having that supportive team and being able to see their strengths and do that treasure hunt is definitely so important. You
Yeah.
also mentioned the medical model and how, you know, sometimes you're so deep in the medical model in some professions that you don't even see your own strengths, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And I can definitely see that and really see that leading to burnout so easily. So, one of my questions is, how can we focus on more of that strength based approach and social model instead of a medical model?
Right. And in some professions, the medical model is very appropriate.
Mm-hmm.
Like when I go to a doctor because I'm sick,
Mm-hmm.
I expect them to use a medical model and find out what's wrong with me, what bacterial infection I have, and prescribe something to fix it. So the
Yep.
problem is we've overgeneralized the medical model well beyond the boundaries of when it's really useful and appropriate. And I think in our field, in therapeutic recreation, we are a profession that is made to be the strengths approach. Like,
Mm-hmm.
what other profession uses the leisure experience as a basis of our helping process? And inherent in that are strengths. So I think one way, when you talk about how can we, not get burned out, is to really embrace the idea that leisure matters and that we are the people who are going to most help people express themselves through leisure. No other profession can, has that. So we bring that to the table. So when you're sitting at a multi or trans or interdisciplinary staffing, nobody else is going to talk about how this person lit up and functioned at a really high level when you were doing a particular leisure activity. And everybody around the table then benefits and learns because they get to see that person that they've seen as sick or broken or in a whole different light. And we can bring that. We bring that to the team on a regular basis. And it's so helpful to the rest of the team to be able to see the whole person and not just the sick or broken part that they're focusing on in their particular role, which may be very much in the medical model because it needs to be, because they're prescribing a certain medication or whatever it might be. And I also think then that we need to keep in mind why leisure is meaningful, which we talked about initially, and how
Mm-hmm.
much joy that brings to people, how much normality to their lives, how much enjoyment and pleasure, all so important when for some reason or another they're, seeking help from professionals. They need what we bring. And so we are so needed. We're like the joy makers, and people need that, and
Yeah.
especially in those low points in their lives where they're seeking professional help. So to embrace that, to really own it as a professional, that I'm the person who's going to bring meaning and joy. I'm the person who's going to highlight the strengths to the rest of the team. I'm going to really help the team see and understand this whole person. And I really think if you can get at that level of passion, you're not going to burn out because you bring so much needed help to to the whole team and the person you're working with. So, I mean, I guess it sounds pretty simplistic, just embrace it, but it really it really does, you know, make a difference when you own what you do and feel really proud of it and do it at the highest, level and quality that you can.
Yeah. Yeah, I think advocating for ourselves and advocating for our clients in that way is so important. And it really helps, bring that hope to the clients, but also to the interdisciplinary team. And
Yes.
that's kind of one of my topics that I'm thinking about now of how can we bring that hope to the clients with a strength-based approach. I'm thinking about, seeing their strengths and, being able to recognize and identify them and kind of build them up with that. But I'm wondering if you have any highlights either
Yeah,
or as
well,
well.
I think you've really touched on it. So we all know and understand the TR process, and when we use the strengths-based lens within the TR process, we're able to first of all do that treasure hunt, help
Mm-hmm.
people identify and find those strengths. Then when we plan, so it's a purposeful process. We need to plan around the person's goals dreams, aspirations, and strengths. We need to help them express those strengths. So all our interventions that follow then need to be opportunities for them to build those strengths and to work towards the goals that they've identified themselves for their lives. And then we need to, document and evaluate how that process is working. So it's the same, systematic process that we all learned. We're just doing it through the lens of helping a person develop their strengths versus fixing a problem.
Yeah.
So I guess to me, that's what operationalizes the strengths approach, is to use the TR process, but use it focusing on strengths and nurturing strengths through that process. Did I
That's
answer
really
your
awesome.
question?
Yes,
Okay.
you did. You did, and then some, like always.
Okay.
That's so awesome, and I can really tell how passionate you are of a strengths-based approach. And it really focuses on my next question of, a strengths-based approach is something you've advocated for a large portion of your career. And I'm wondering what drew you to this approach, and I can see, how important it is to you, but I'm wondering, what was that initial thing that drew you to that approach?
Yeah, I think you might be able to relate to this coming from a non-traditional pathway into the field, but I entered the field through seeing the power of the recreation experience as an outdoor recreation leader, and I would see how much I greatly impacted people's lives. And so I entered the field with the foundation of the power of the recreation experience. I didn't enter the field as a therapist. If that, so I didn't enter the field thinking I'm going to fix broken people. I entered the field thinking I want to share the power of the recreation experience with people who most need it.
Yeah.
And so I think that right there maybe got me on the path to a strengths approach. I think my initial work in the field for that large regional healthcare facility, where the role of that I found myself in a lot on the team was to highlight and emphasize strengths to the rest of the team, that sort of solidified that, wow, this really matters. I can still remember sitting in a large, conference room with all these different disciplines, and I'd be sharing what I saw a person do, and they'd all be like, what? No, they didn't do that. I'm like, yes, like just really showing that the whole person matters in the treatment process. And then I've had wonderful mentors. I did my PhD at the University of Minnesota, which had a very strong orientation to the strengths approach in really the whole, health and human services fields there were very much on that approach. And so I got an academic preparation in the strengths approach. And then I've just followed that passion throughout my career and stayed involved. For example, I joined the International Positive Psychology Association as soon as it was formed, and have been a member, which is completely focusing on using the strengths approach. And sort of a misnomer, it's called the International Positive Psychology Association, but it's not just psychologists, it's it's all fields, so it should really be called the International Positive Science Association, because it's all different disciplines and fields that are involved. But just continuing there's so much we're learning about the strengths approach, that the power of it. So that's really kept me engaged. And having great colleagues to work with. So Linda Hine has been a colleague. We've worked together for years. She also got her PhD at the University of Minnesota, so we met there and continued to collaborate through the years. Colleen Hood and Cindy Carruthers, two wonderful mentors and colleagues that I've collaborated with through the years. Marcia Carter, Karen Wenzel, just really great people in the field that have, helped me build, my passion further for this approach.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that. And yeah, I find that when you start using the strengths approach professionally, it leaks into all aspects of your life. I'm thankful that when I was a child and just throughout my entire life, I could always see those strengths in others, and people would be like, why are you that person's friend?
Yeah.
why are you visiting those people? And I would be like, well, they have all these strengths. Why wouldn't I, you know? So
It's
I can really
wonderful.
see that showing up in other aspects of our life as well. And you mentioned positive psychology, and I think strengths approach is so embedded in positive psychology for sure, of seeing that individual and seeing their strengths and focusing on that.
Yeah.
So I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah.
And so you mentioned your colleagues and, started mentioning really the evolution of this approach. And I'm wondering, since starting it, how has the strengths approach evolved over the years?
For me, I think the main thing that I've seen is how when I first wrote or talked about the strengths approach, and a lot of people would be, it's great and everything. I just don't see how it could work in practice.
Yeah.
I mean, how are we going to counteract what we see happening in practice? To now, really, the strengths approach is very mainstream, and large systems, and I'm speaking from the perspective of the United States, but like the Veterans Administration, the VA uses a strengths approach. Long-term care across the United States, and I believe in Canada, uses a strengths approach called culture change, really shifting, the whole model of long-term care to a strengths approach. The all the systems and services set up for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities strongly embracing a strengths approach. So just seeing that shift in the field where it went from sort of this fringe idea to mainstream practice has, for me, probably been the largest growth area that I've seen.
Yeah.
And I think throughout all that, I think our field has a leadership role and has a strong role in helping that happen. So in systems that are shifting to that approach, leisure becomes very important in the strengths approach. And thus our field in turn becomes very important because we're the people who help facilitate that aspect of a person's lives. So when you use a person-centered strengths approach, leisure isn't some superfluous activity that doesn't fit into the medical model. It's like a core element of helping a person grow, adapt, and change. And so um, that is probably the other growth area I've seen for our field. I think it's elevated our status within the helping professions.
Yeah, I think, this entire conversation really leads up to this point of, a strengths approach and meaningful recreation and leisure. I think one of my favorite parts about recreation and leisure is, say if someone wants to has some sort of goal in recreation and leisure, there's not just one approach. There's so many different, and so we can really capture the person's strengths and focus on what's motivating them and what's the interest of them and theirs, to really allow them to make that goal met. And I'm wondering, what was that pivotal point, or can you remember a pivotal point of the culture change in um, I guess, highlighting the strengths approach?
One pivotal point.
Or do you think it was just something that was built up and then
I
it just
think
kind of took off?
I do. I think it's been more. We use the analogy in our book of a sea change. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's sort of a slow, imperceptible change that happens over time. And that's how I see the strengths approach having evolved, where all of a sudden you realize you're way downstream or upstream from where you were. It's sort of like you didn't notice it happening, but all of a sudden, wow, it's changed. It's different. I do think the growth of positive psychology, or I would reframe that positive science, where as not just our field but many fields have started to say, well, we studied depression to death, let's study happiness.
Yeah.
Let's study positive emotions instead of just always studying negative emotions. Let's study positive experiences instead of just negative ones. I think that was a key pivotal change for the strengths approach, is that there is ample scientific evidence now to support this, using the strengths approach. that wasn't there even, 15 years ago, 10 years ago. And it's growing, so rapidly. So I would say other profession, other disciplines, attention to what we've paid attention to forever has really helped our profession.
Yes,
Yeah.
I agree. Speaking on that interdisciplinary team thought, how can we really reach further to other professions? I know definitely psychology and social work are focusing on that positive psychology, but how can we reach to other professions to utilize these key concepts or components and learnings from a strengths approach? And really, even in the medical model, maybe how can we, also consider the strengths a person has?
Yeah, that's a good question. So as I mentioned earlier, continually bringing the strengths approach to the table in your work. So at every staffing, at every meeting, at every teachable moment, bringing that approach to other disciplines. But what I've found is that other disciplines are very open and very willing to support that approach as well. And other disciplines are also embracing it. It's not, not just our discipline that's embracing the strengths approach. So I think being always a teacher and advocate of the strengths approach impacts other professions and changes systems over time. So yeah, I think just doing what we keep just doing it, just keep doing it, role model it, show the successes of it, um, and as well collect evidence, so add to the body of knowledge if you can. I think sometimes people who work in the field think they're not the ones who should be collecting data and doing research, and yet they're really in a great position to collect data on the effectiveness of their programs, which adds to the body of knowledge, which helps us show that this approach is very impactful and helpful to people. So
Yeah. That's awesome. I really appreciate you sharing that. And yeah, I think when we are able to, share our success stories and really advocate for our clients and bring to the table all the strengths that they do have and different things that they have achieved, it really helps to shape a larger picture of that individual of rather than just, okay, this is their diagnosis, here's all the lists, let's do a round. Let's talk about all the successes they've had and all the things that they've strived towards. That's awesome.
yeah, I think I was
Sorry, go
going to
ahead.
add, there's a program that I'm just so in awe of it. It's in Ontario, and it's called the Mood Walks. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but um, recreation therapists and other mental health professionals collaborated with Parks and Rec and natural resource managers and developed nature walks that are, um, designed to increase mindfulness and enjoyment and all those things that we work towards in our field, and collected evidence. So used, pre and post testing and did assessment during the program, focusing on things like positive emotion and health and well-being. Um, and that kind of collaboration, I think, is something we can do. I feel like our field, more than any other healthcare profession, reaches out into the community and uses community resources so we can create partnerships in the community where we can really begin to develop people's strengths and help them express them for the long term. So not just while they're, with a particular treatment program, but afterwards, so that they can continue to develop and grow in that, that area that we can help them begin, the roots of when we
Yeah,
work with them.
that's
But
very
I can't think
interesting.
of another discipline. I mean, if you think about, our curriculum, we learn all about parks and recreation as a part of our curriculum. And that is, we can leverage then in the field to make those partnerships really strong. Then that'll help that person, transition to their real life for the long haul. So,
That's very interesting. I'd never heard of the mood walks. but innately I started doing it in one of my programs. So one of the client needs for multiple clients in my facility right now was nature and nature-based therapy, because they felt, you know, on their unit, they felt a little bit more stressed and anxious. They preferred being outside. So I really took this upon myself to create a program around this. And it's interesting enough that I also did pre and post. And I think it's really interesting to see that shift of mindset and mood, and really see how self-aware they can become of, you know, if I don't do that, sometimes it feels, you know, oh, I have to do a pre and post. This seems like a lot of work. Like, I don't want to inconvenience them. But it's been so instrumental in them recognizing how much of a difference it's made on them. And even I do it as well when I'm running the program and seeing the change in myself and really reducing that burnout, because I can see how much, you know, implementing these programs is affecting me as well.
Yeah, that's
One
wonderful.
question, yeah, thank you. One question I have is, say if I wanted to, or anyone wanted to share their pre and post or their evaluations, how would we include that into the research, and where would we go to, you know, implement that?
Yeah. So one good starting point would be to reach out to your local university if there's a program and there are people, you know, on faculty that are doing research. But besides that, the one of the main journals in the field, for example, the Therapeutic Recreation Journal, has a practice perspective where you know, they can be short, brief reports where you just write up about your program and your results to submit.
Mm-hmm.
The guidelines are all there, so it doesn't have to be a full-blown research project, but a practice perspective. And the whole idea of that is to bring that evidence-based practice to the greater field. Um, so you said right now you're doing your practicum, which is your internship, right? The same
Mm-hmm.
thing.
Yes.
You could work with your internship or your practicum preceptor or supervisor to, you know, that person could potentially help you write up some results. Um, I guess, was it last year or the year before, I worked with one of the interns I was supervising from an academic perspective, and the internship supervisor and the student, and the three of us wrote up her special project and published it in the Therapeutic Rec Journal. So she did the same as you discussed, collected pre and post data and was able to show a significant impact from her program. It was a therapeutic arts program in a community-based mental health setting. And so it's very doable, you know, and the editorial board of the Therapeutic Rec Journal can be very helpful. They'll give you feedback, so you may have to resubmit it a couple times, but it'll get
Mm-hmm.
to the point where it's publishable and could be shared with the greater field. Um, the mood walks, I first learned about it through a Canadian Therapeutic Rec Association webinar. They gave a webinar on the program. So that's a whole nother way to share what you're doing in the field, is to, you know, approach your provincial or your national organization and you know, do a webinar, and that will get the information out to the field. But then I would
That's,
say the logical next step is to publish it.
yeah.
Get
That's
it in
very
the
interesting.
literature.
Yes. I've always been someone who's been interested in publishing, but thought it was very far-fetched and that I would have to complete a master's or something in it. So that's interesting how available it is to do. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, I
Maybe I'll
encourage
have
you
to
to
work
do
on
it.
that. Yeah, that's awesome. So we've kind of already touched on this, and I want to just come back to it quickly of how can we bring a strength-based approach into the medical model? For me and for my preceptor, we talked about how we feel like we're a salmon swimming upstream sometimes and feel burnt out by always advocating for this and kind of getting met with, you know, that deficit approach of, well, these are all the things they need to fix before they can do that. So how can we continue to advocate for that, but also, you know, maybe get a little bit more buy-in from other disciplines?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I hear that from a lot of people that, boy, everybody's just so into the medical model. They can't seem to see outside of that lens. Probably one of your best selling points are the people you're working with, the participants who are receiving your services. And if you're collecting evidence, as you talked about, showing that to the team, like, here's how this person scored before and after this intervention, see how much it helped, that kind of bringing that data to the team. And I would invite your team members, if I know how busy everybody is on a team and it's hard to do this, but invite, the nurse or the social worker or are you working in mental health? Did you say even the psychologist or the psychiatrist? Invite them to participate in an activity or two that you do, so that they can see what you're doing. I think continually bringing feedback to staffings, to care planning sessions, that strength space. Continue to embrace it yourself. um, so just owning it, like this is just what we do. I don't have to advocate for it or fight for it. I just do it. I guess those would be some suggestions I would have. I know years ago when I worked at a hospital, and I developed at that point, we called it extended off ward, and it was basically a day-long nature-based intervention in a local state park. So to even get that to happen, I had to review the literature, show that this would work, this would have an impact. I had to get buy-in from other disciplines. But once I got approval from, basically the medical director to do this program, then I needed to involve some other disciplines because we were off site for a full day. And so I needed nursing and I needed social work there. That was just a game changer for those staff that were involved. They got to experience a full day of what we do, and they benefited personally, but they got to see how the participants benefited and became just such strong advocates for our profession after being involved in that day-long program on a regular basis. So that kind of invitation to be a part of what we do could be pretty powerful. It's hard because people are, there's more work to do than there are people to do it. But if you can get them, another approach is to offer to do co-leadership or co-treatment, work with the dietitian to do a wellness group, work with the PT to do the mood walks, or just, try to devise strengths-based interdisciplinary programs that you could use would be another approach.
Yeah, those are all really great examples. And I know, one thing we're trying to do is really get, the social work and OTs involved in our walks, because even myself, when I'm walking, if I'm with a friend, I disclose so much more because it's not that stressful interview session. It's more so at a leisure pace and words can just flow out. So I definitely agree with that. Another thing
I would add to that, Adriana, that is really there's a theoretical basis for that happening, which is the theory, the upward spiral theory of lifestyle change, which says that the more we experience enjoyment, the more we are open to change, the more we are motivated to change, the more we experience positive emotion, and we have this upward spiral. A key factor is positivity and enjoyment. And where does that happen? During our activities, during our walks in nature. So other disciplines can definitely benefit from, the positive emotion and positive experiences that people are having. Why not have all the disciplines there, really help that person, receive full treatment. So there's a lot to that. It's the broaden and build theory as well.
I can think personally of when I'm doing any kind of activity, how when I have that buy-in and when I have, an activity and can see it for myself, I believe in that process a lot more. So I think something that I'm trying to do is a webinar for our facility for all disciplines to talk about recreation and leisure and personalize it. Think of what's meaningful to my life. How is recreation and leisure important to me? How is strength-based approach embedded into that? And then, I'm hoping that that will move forward, and maybe even if it reshapes one person's thinking, that would be great.
Yeah, that's really good idea. The other thing I wanted to mention when you talked about, well, we can't work on strengths until we fix deficits, is sort of that stepping stone idea that, first this, then you can move to this, then you can graduate to this. And if you think about the underlying theories of human growth and development, self-determination is a very key aspect of us being able to grow and learn. So the lack of self-determination that the medical model can induce is actually, counter to that. And so that stepping stone model, really, if you think of the underlying assumptions and theoretical base, is not effective. You're basically teaching people to be dependent and not to feel like they have control of their lives.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another rationale I would give to your team members or whoever you're trying to convince on the strength approach, is that people need to experience and express self-determination to be healthy and functioning human beings. And that if we don't let them do that, we're keeping them sick.
Yeah, exactly. It's like that sense of hopelessness. We're creating hopelessness.
Yes.
Yeah, that's great. I appreciate you sharing that and giving all your insights for all of this. Continuing on, I'm wondering if you have any resources you'd like to promote. I know I have your textbook and I reference this thing on a weekly.
Oh, can I show you something?
Yeah.
Second edition.
Oh,
We're very
exciting.
excited about it. Yeah, we just updated that text to the second edition, and it really just came out like this month in print.
Wow.
Or an ebook. So yeah, there's so much. Like I would strongly advocate for joining your professional associations, because I feel like that's where a lot of new ideas and new research on the strengths approach is being presented and discussed.
Mm-hmm.
As well, I mentioned the International Positive Psychology Association, kind of not just our own profession, but related professions or disciplines that help form the basis of our profession. Being involved in those has really helped me see new research that of which all supports our field so strongly. There's a center at Berkeley in California. It's called the Greater Good Science Center, which really brings research into practice from the positive sciences. I would highly recommend their website and their newsletter. And they have a kind of an evidence-based practice part of their website where it's all these activities that we could use in our practice and all the research that supports them as being effective interventions for people. So that's a great resource.
Yeah.
And then I really believe that we need to address the context of a person's life as much as, and sometimes more than, the individual person. And so they're, looking outside of the box as far as, well, what can help us be more effective at changing environments to help people. And so in that process, I discovered just a wonderful researcher who's an interior designer. But her work directly impacts and supports our field. Her name is Ingrid Fattel Lee, and her book is called Joyful, but she also has a website that's just full of resources on how to increase joy in people's environments. It's just loaded with useful information on things we could use on our unit or at our long-term care facility or wherever it is we happen to practice, things that we could do to change the environment around people to improve their mental health, their level of joy, their engagement with their lives. So, I'd say don't just look at our own field, but outside of our the things we think are related.
Yeah, exactly. That's so interesting that an interior designer had a similar thought. And yeah, I think so many different people, I mean, recreation and leisure, the beautiful thing about it is everyone participates in it. So everyone has a say and a thought behind it. So yeah, that's great. And yeah, going back to the social model, environment is one of the largest components in that social model. So
Yeah.
it's
know,
just intuitive to think about. Yeah.
And I think historically, especially if you work in any kind of an institutional type setting, whether it's a hospital or a long-term care facility or a residential treatment center, our discipline has typically been sort of the holiday decorations, the bulletin boards, the plants. And I think a lot of people are like, why am I getting stuck doing this? And it's like, oh, embrace it because it's so important. You can have such a positive effect on, your participants by helping to improve the aesthetics and the beauty and the joy of the environment. So I would say, don't complain about having to decorate for the holidays. Embrace it and make it as therapeutic as you possibly can.
Yes, I agree. That's awesome. I really appreciate that insight. And, moving into our next discussion, to kind of have an end to this one and a start to the next, how can we really mend a strength-based approach into inclusive recreation?
So personally, I believe that inclusion really mandates a strengths approach. That if you believe a person can be fully included in recreation and in our communities, you've got to be able to see all the strengths and talents and abilities that they can gift or bring to that inclusive recreation experience. So they blend together almost seamlessly in my mind. That inclusion is based on a strengths approach. That we've historically offered separate and segregated and not equal programs for people with disabilities because we didn't think they were quite up to the demands of, what everybody else is doing for recreation. That's back to that deficit medical model. So for full inclusion to really happen, we have to believe in and support and nurture the strengths of people that want to be included. So I don't see them as really separate. I see them as an extension of each other.
Thank you all so much for listening today and tuning in. I'm so excited that I had the opportunity and honor to have Lynn Anderson herself on to speak today about the strength-based approach. Next episode, tune in to really dive deep and learn all about inclusive recreation and what that means. I know we just started dipping our toes in the topic, but I'm really excited to share the rest of this conversation with you.